You're not broken. You're waking up. Have you ever felt as if the world suddenly became foreign to you? As if you were drifting through a fog of exhaustion and disconnection, unable to grasp why your heart feels so shattered? Pause for 10 seconds. I'm not here to heal you. I'm here to remind you you're not broken. You're waking up. You might be sitting alone in a familiar room, but your heart is wandering in some far-off place, one that logic cannot name. Everything in your life, every broken relationship, every moment of confusion, every abandoned dream might be whispering something to you. Something deeper, quieter. And if you're brave enough to listen, you'll realize they didn't come to destroy you. They came to awaken you. Carl Jung once said, enlightenment is not about imagining figures of light, but about making the darkness conscious. Awakening is not something you learn, it's something you remember. You remember that you are not just the roles you play, the daughter, the lover, the successful one. You are a soul traveling through lifetimes. And sometimes pain is simply the soul knocking, asking to be seen. You don't need to get better. You're becoming who you really are. You don't need to get over the pain. You're shedding an old skin to return to your true essence. When a woman says, I don't know who I am anymore, that's not a sign of breaking down. It's a signal of transformation, a necessary unraveling so the old structure can collapse and make space for a new form of life, one born of the soul. You might be afraid. That's completely normal. Jung himself endured a spiritual collapse so profound he feared he was going insane. But it was there in the depths of that inner night that he met himself. Not the social persona, but the sacred, wild, primordial self. In the dark night of the soul, we find the gold. Many believe awakening is a pleasant experience. It's not. It's a labor, an inner birth where the old groans and crumbles so the new can breathe. It's the terrifying loss of every familiar anchor, only to discover that the darkness itself is guiding you toward the light. You don't need someone else to validate your worth. You are being called home by the universe within you. You don't need to resist the pain. You need to listen to the voice beneath it. And here in this quiet, sacred space, we'll begin to unfold the deeper meanings behind it all. The shadow, the anima and animus, the transcendent function, and the journey back to the self, the sacred core you've forgotten. In the next part, I'll take you to a realization that could shake the very foundation of your worldview. The darkness you fear the most is your greatest guide. And Carl Jung spent a lifetime showing that in every broken dream, a sacred wisdom awaits your embrace. So keep listening. If something deep within you is stirring, because what you're feeling might not be pain, it might be your soul calling you home. When people suffer, they often believe something is wrong within them. But Jung said suffering is the invitation from the self for consciousness to enter the shadow. The shadow is not your enemy. It's the part of your soul you've refused to see. And pain is its first whisper. In Jungian psychology, the shadow isn't bad. It's the exiled, forbidden, unaccepted part of you, the parts you were told to hide as a child in order to be good. The parts you buried to please your parents, society, teachers, lovers. It's the child you left behind the day you learned how to smile through hurt. And every time you overreact, lash out, or feel triggered by someone, that's your shadow speaking. It didn't come to destroy you. It came to be embraced. Imagine this, a girl raised to be sweet, polite, agreeable. She learns to suppress her anger, her power, her wild voice. She smiles when she's hurt. She stays silent when insulted. By 30, she feels lost, trapped in controlling relationships, anxious, depressed. Is she broken? No. She is being awakened by the feminine shadow within her, the part that is fierce, angry, powerful, the soul that she silenced for years. The shadow is not evil, it's just unwelcomed. Jung once wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's why during crisis, many people begin to dream of snakes, demons, shadows, the dead. It's not madness. It's ancient symbolism, archetypes rising from the collective unconscious saying, it's time you see me. And the shadow doesn't only show up in dreams, it lives in the people you can't stand, in the arrogant coworker, in the ex who betrayed you, in you when jealousy erupts, when you rebel, when you want to run away from everything. Jung said everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But why are we so afraid to face our shadow? Because it makes us feel out of control. Because the shadow holds everything we were taught we're not allowed to be desiring. Angry, greedy, weak, afraid, abandoned. It holds our wildest dreams, our strangest longings. As children, when we showed fear, we were mocked. When we showed anger, we were scolded. When we dreamed too big, we were told we were foolish. So piece by piece, we buried those parts. But they never died. They've been waiting for the day you'd be brave enough to say, "I see you now." And when you begin to listen, the shadow begins to transform. From darkness, it becomes a guide. From troublemaker, it becomes a source of power. From what made you feel wrong, it becomes the material for your wholeness. Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the sacred journey of returning to your true self beyond the social mass, beyond the persona. So, how do you find your shadow? You don't need a deep analysis. Just listen to what makes you feel most. Who triggers you the most? What situations make you lose control? What makes you feel ashamed or guilty? That's where your shadow lives. And it's not waiting to be fixed. It's waiting to be understood. And here's the miracle. When you begin to embrace your shadow, you begin to find your light. You realize you're not broken, just disconnected from a part of yourself. That the angry child who once screamed for love still lives inside you waiting for a hug. That the belief, "I'm not good enough," was the biggest lie you ever believed. And that the pain you've been avoiding was actually the doorway to awakening. Carl Jung wasn't a healer, he was a guide. And if you've read this far, perhaps your soul is on a similar journey. The journey of remembering who you are, beneath the masks, beneath the roles you've played for too long. Remember, you don't need to become someone else. You just need the courage to return to yourself, both the light and the shadow. And now I invite you, share your story. Have you ever met your shadow? Is there a part of you you once rejected that is now beginning to be seen? Leave a comment below, not just to share, but to connect with others walking the same path. Let's co-create a space for awakening, a space where you don't need to be healed to be accepted, but are accepted so you can truly heal. In the next part of this video, we'll explore a profound Jungian symbol, one he believed held the soul's deepest healing power, the anima and animus, the inner opposites living within each of us. They are the map home to wholeness. Are you ready to meet the forgotten soul within you? Keep watching where awakening becomes a sacred reunion. There is a kind of pain, mysterious soul-shaking, that no one teaches us how to face. It's the pain of losing yourself in love. When you love so deeply that you forget who you are, or when someone leaves and you feel utterly shattered. Know this, it's not just about romance. It's the awakening of a soul within you. Anima if you're a man, animus if you're a woman. Carl Jung believed that each of us carries an inner beloved, an unconscious image of the opposite gender living in our soul. The anima is the feminine archetype within a man's psyche. The animus is the masculine archetype within a woman's inner world. And when we fall in love, we're not just falling for a person. We're falling for the forgotten piece of our own soul. That's why love is both beautiful and dangerous. You're not just searching for someone. You're searching for the part of yourself you lost. When a man is drawn to an emotional, gentle, mysterious woman, his anima may be calling to be seen. When a woman is captivated by a strong-willed, rational, idealistic man, she may be encountering her animus. But if you're unaware of this, love becomes obsession, because you can no longer tell, are you loving them or the soul image you've projected onto them? We don't fall in love with others. We fall in love with the parts of ourselves we've never loved, and the other person becomes a mirror for that. Jung once said marriage is a psychological relationship, a dialogue between anima and animus. But not everyone is ready for that dialogue, because it demands brutal honesty and a heart courageous enough not to blame, not to idolize, not to control. Real love begins when illusion ends. When you stop expecting the other to save you and begin to ask what part of you is seeking salvation, that's when the anima or animus begins to teach. Maybe you're meant to learn self-tenderness, what you once demanded from others. Maybe you're meant to set boundaries, the very thing your inner animus is urging you to grow. There was once a woman who grieved a breakup for years. She couldn't let him go, even though the relationship had been painful. Every time she meditated, his image appeared. But through dream work and inner exploration, she realized that image wasn't him anymore. It was an unintegrated animus, a masculine energy she hadn't yet owned. She began to write, create, build boundaries, define her own ideals. Everything she had once hoped he would give her. And slowly, the pain dissolved. Love stopped being a blade. it became power. So how do you recognize your anima or animus? Shomanari, pay attention to the people you idolize or obsess over. Look closely at intense emotional patterns in romantic relationships. Reflect on recurring dreams featuring the opposite sex. Chances are, it's not about them. It's about a missing part of you trying to be seen. And when you begin a dialogue with your anima or animus, you begin to become whole. You no longer chase love like a hunger. You no longer depend on someone to understand you, because you've begun to understand yourself through the mirror of the other. You love not to be filled, but to share, not to escape loneliness, but to invite someone into a soul already full. Anima and animus are the language of the soul. They are the forgotten melody in your inner symphony. And when you hear that music again, you no longer seek someone to save you. You begin to live as someone who has found themselves. And now I invite you to reflect. Have you ever been in a relationship you couldn't let go of? Does the image of a past lover still linger in your heart like a ghost? Share in the comments, not to vent, but to connect with other souls who are finding their way home. Together, we are creating a space where love is no longer a tragedy, but a path back to the self. And in the next part, we'll go even deeper into what Jung called the transcendent function, the sacred process where the opposites within you begin to reconcile. It's the turning point when you stop being a victim of fate and start becoming a participant in your own sacred evolution. Are you ready to see yourself not through another's eyes, but through the eyes of your soul? Keep watching. The awakening has just begun. There are moments in life when you feel torn in two. One part wants to let go. Another wants to hold on. One part craves freedom. The other clings to the safety of the familiar. You want to break free, yet silence keeps you frozen. And you wonder, who am I between these two poles? Carl Jung called this a sacred tension, where the opposing forces within you are not a flaw in your system, but the very raw material for a deep psychic process he called the transcendent function. The transcendent function is not about choosing sides. It's the ability to hold both polarities in the mind without collapsing, to be afraid and curious, to feel weak and yet powerful, to be the child seeking safety and the soul stepping into the unknown. We've been taught for too long that we must pick one, either logic or emotion, either strength or vulnerability. But the soul doesn't think in binaries. The soul knows that between the extremes, a doorway opens. A place where you stop being the victim of fragmentation and begin to witness the inner union of opposites. A man once shared, "I've always been the one in control, planning, organizing, keeping everything together. But suddenly I couldn't sleep. I kept dreaming I was lost in a forest. No way out. I screamed, but no one heard. I woke up in a panic." He began therapy. The dreams intensified, until one night he saw a child sitting by a stream drawing right in the heart of that forest. The child looked at him and said, "You don't need to escape. You just need to learn how to live in the forest." That was the turning point. He began to embrace the chaos within. He started journaling, meditating, letting his dreams guide him. And slowly the transcendent function came alive. It didn't erase his fear. It allowed both the need for control and the presence of fear to coexist, held gently in the light of awareness. Jung called this the sacred ground where the ego meets the self. The transcendent function doesn't come from logic. It doesn't come from instinct. It comes from the courage to stay with contradiction without rushing to fix it, without forcing yourself to be healed or whole. It's like standing in the middle of a storm and yet feeling strangely still inside. This is when dreams begin to speak in clear symbols. You dream of bridges, oceans, mountains, storms, past lovers appearing, then vanishing, light breaking through dark skies. Each symbol is a message from the unconscious, not asking you to choose sides, but to listen, to trust that something within you is transforming. When the transcendent function activates, you are no longer the one suffering from heartbreak or lost in confusion. You are the one listening to both the part of you that wants to hold on and the part that longs to let go. And instead of choosing between them, you begin to merge them into a path that never existed before. This is where inner alchemy begins. When the ego steps back and finally listens to the self, you stop trying to control reality and start co-creating with it. You begin to see that every contradiction is an unfinished poem, every pain a raw material for a new design being forged within you. You don't need to redefine yourself. You need to let yourself be reborn through the fragmentation. As the ancient alchemists once said, gold appears only after everything has been burned to ash. The transcendent function is that fire burning down outdated definitions so you can emerge not as a better version, but as a more integrated one. So I invite you to reflect. Is there a contradiction within you so intense that it hurts? Can you stay with it, not to fix it, but to simply witness it? Share your experience in the comments. You'll discover you are not alone. We souls learning how to live with paradox are a growing community. We write for each other, read one another's stories, and hold space for each other to keep walking. And in the next part, we'll enter the story of transformation, where personal wounds are no longer just cuts, but sacred rites of passage. We'll explore why Jung believed all suffering is ritualistic and how your breakdown might just be a sacred threshold to the self. Are you ready to step into the alchemical fire? See you in the next part, where pain begins to tell a whole new story. Imagine you're walking down a dark, uneven road. There are no signs, no map, no one beside you. Just the wind, your footsteps, and a vague sense whispering, I'm no longer who I used to be. This is not being lost. This is a rite of passage. Carl Jung believed that every deep suffering is ritualistic. It's not punishment. It's not personal failure. It's not a psychological flaw. It is a form of initiation, a spiritual threshold where the old self must die so a new being can be born. In ancient traditions, whenever a soul crossed into a new phase, from child to adult civilian to warrior, human to healer, they were led through a ritual of dismemberment, destruction of the old, descent into chaos, descent into darkness, and finally rebirth. But in the modern world, we no longer have these rituals. What we have is crisis, a breakup that shatters your sense of self, an illness that forces you to question life, a career collapse that makes you realize you've never lived authentically. These aren't here to destroy you. They are here to awaken a sacred movement within your soul, and you are already inside this ritual, whether you know it or not. Jung called this stage nigredo, the first phase of spiritual alchemy. In traditional alchemy, nigredo is when the material is burned to the bone, blackened, scorched, completely dissolved. It is total darkness, the feeling of no way out, the collapse of the ego. But if you don't run, something miraculous begins to unfold. Not immediate healing, but a deep inner knowing begins to rise from within. Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Darkness is not something to get through. It is something to fully experience. Every feeling you're trying to avoid, fear, anger, loneliness, despair, is part of the ritual. Imagine a young mother. After giving birth, she feels lost, disconnected from herself, exhausted and torn between her role and her identity. But instead of escaping the pain, she sits down and writes. She pours her tears and unspeakable rage onto the page. She begins to meditate, to dream. And in those dreams, she realizes her child was not just born from her body, but from a darkness inside her she had never dared to touch. In her unraveling, she finds herself again, not the perfect woman, but the whole woman. Pain is a ritual. No priest, no altar. Just you sitting in an empty room, feeling the inner world tremble. This is where spiritual alchemy truly begins. After nigredo comes albedo, the soul begins to purify. Then citrinitas, new awareness, takes shape. And finally, rubedo, the union, where ego and soul begin to dance together. You don't need to read all the alchemy texts. You just need to remember every deep pain is a sacred ritual unfolding inside you. And if you stay long enough, the other side of your breakdown isn't the end. It's the first sunrise of a soul reborn. So I invite you to reflect. Where are you right now in your ritual? Is there something you're enduring that may actually be a soul calling you into deeper meaning? Share in the comments. Don't hold it alone. We are souls walking through the dark together. You don't have to survive this alone. When you speak, others will see themselves in your story, and in that moment, your ritual touches theirs. We become a community not because we're the same, but because we dared to walk through our own fires. And in the next part of this journey, we'll enter its peak. No longer breakdowns, no more theory, no more analysis, but integration. What Jung called the self, the whole sacred deepest essence of who you are. Are you ready to find the light not at the end of the tunnel, but within the darkness itself? I'll see you in the next part, where awakening becomes a complete homecoming. There comes a moment quiet, unglamorous, like a bell echoing through the morning mist, when you suddenly no longer feel the need to become someone. No more forcing yourself to heal, No more performing positivity. No more searching outside for someone to fill the emptiness within. You just become present, and from deep inside a quiet peace rises, gentle yet unshakable. This is the moment you begin to touch the self, the whole self. The self is not the ego. The ego is the actor. The self is the stage. The ego is temporary. The self is origin. The ego asks, "What must I do to be loved?" The self whispers, "You already are love." Carl Jung said that the entire journey of analytical psychology, from shadow to anima, chashin animus, from inner conflict to sacred transformation, was ultimately preparing us for one thing: the sacred encounter with the self. The self is not your ideal self. It is your true self, where light and shadow are no longer at war, but reconciled. Where you stop playing the victim or the hero and become the witness of your own soul. The self is both destination and beginning. Because when you touch the self, you don't become better. You become more real. You cry when you need to cry. You laugh without guilt. You say no without feeling selfish. You forgive without needing to forget. You no longer live to please others. You live to be honest with your soul. One woman shared, during years of inner crisis, she went through therapy, meditation, dream work, and endless reading. But one night, sitting alone under a tree, the moonlight falling on hands that had once harmed herself, her heart softened. No more anger, no more performing. She simply whispered, "I'm still here, still alive." And that is enough. That moment had no technique, no analysis, just the self present. So how do you reach the self? Jung never gave a formula, because the self cannot be achieved by willpower. It arises when you stop trying to control, when you trust yourself enough to sit down unmasked, unguarded, when you allow the unconscious to speak through dreams, images, feelings. The self isn't far away, it's just beneath the mask you wear every day. And you'll know you're touching the self when you stop judging the parts of you you once tried to erase. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself in order to be loved. You accept that pain is also a meaningful way to live. You see yourself in others, not through roles, but through essence. The self doesn't promise you'll never suffer, but it walks you through suffering with dignity. It is the part of you that knows even in chaos, you have a center. Even when the world around you crumbles, you do not lose yourself. So now I invite you to reflect. Have you ever felt peace for no reason? Have you had a moment when everything was still imperfect, but you felt whole anyway? Share it in the comments. Not just for you, but for someone out there who needs that light. Sometimes your simple story can be the spark for someone who feels lost. We don't have to be fully awakened. We just have to keep returning bit by bit, like souls remembering who they've always been. And in the final part of this journey, we'll explore how to live with the self in the real world, where love, work, conflict, and chaos still exist. Because awakening is not a single moment, it is a daily practice of presence. Are you ready not just to understand yourself, but to become yourself fully, gently, one breath, one action, one day at a time? I'll see you in the final chapter where theory becomes life. Maybe you're still sitting in a quiet room. Maybe you still don't know what tomorrow holds. But one thing is certain, you've begun to look within, and that has changed everything. You're no longer the one running from pain. You've become the one walking through it, carrying a quiet, steady light that slowly begins to spread in your inner darkness. Carl Jung was more than a psychoanalyst. He was the one who gently pulled back the curtain between the small self and the vast soul within us all. He didn't teach us to fix our problems. He invited us to enter them, to sit with them, to listen, to understand that pain is not the end, but the bell that calls us to awaken. You're not broken, you're waking up. Awakening is not a blinding moment of glory. It's a quiet return through the smallest of things. A dream that lingers in your thoughts all day. A sentence that brings you to tears on a crowded street. A moment of forgiving yourself for no reason at all. You've come a long way. Maybe no one sees it, but your soul knows, and that's what matters most. And now I want to hear from you. What part of this video touched you the most? Where are you in your journey back to yourself? Leave a comment below, not for comfort, but for connection. Because maybe your story is the light someone else has been waiting for in their silent struggle. And in that moment, we're no longer alone. If this video felt like a door you've been waiting to open, hit subscribe. Not to follow someone else, but to walk alongside yourself in a community of souls learning to remember. I'm not broken. I'm coming home. And if you wish to continue this journey, where each video isn't just content but a ritual, where every story reflects a piece of your own soul, stay, because in the next video we'll enter Jung's final sacred symbol, the mandala, the image of a soul made whole, where the ego no longer controls a soul, but surrenders to the sacred that is slowly being revealed. Are you ready to live as a living mandala, whole, authentic, and at peace? Thank you for walking this path with me. Not everyone dares to face the deepest truths within themselves, but you did, and I believe you will continue. Not because you have to, but because your soul is whispering. We've waited a long time to live honestly. I'll see you again in that place where the heart no longer fears, where you are not just understood, but fully seen.